it's always hard to get a sense of how ordinary civilians in Iran are feeling because of obviously security restrictions and internet disruptions. And obviously it's impossible to generalize. You're dealing with tens of millions of people, but there are of course some who support the regime, others who are fiercely opposed to it. For those who are fiercely opposed to this regime, for those who had hoped that somehow the US intervention would lead to regime change, do those people still believe at this point that the US has their best interests at heart?
Thanks for having me. No, I don't think so. And I mean, I would add a third group, which is sort of a big gray area somewhere in the middle, who is unhappy with the status quo, very much opposed with social, political, economic grievances, but also never saw this foreign intervention as the quote unquote help that President Trump had suggested. And since the war has actually happened and unfolded, I think it's become clear, even for most of the people who thought that this would change things on the ground, that not only didn't it help Iranian protesters or the Iranian people, it actually made things worse. And considering the number of the death toll, the civilian death toll, almost 4,000 Iranians dead, most of them civilians, many children, lots of civilian infrastructure has been damaged, destroyed. The war opened with an attack on a school full of children, hospitals, universities, cultural heritage, which have nothing to do with any government. They've been there for centuries. And also the US president tweeting or truth socialing multiple times that he wants to wipe out a civilization or destroy a civilization. That has nothing to do with the government. It's very much, portraying the war as a war on Iran and Iranians. And I think that's what most people understand, regardless of where they stand politically vis-a-vis their own government.
I'm so glad you brought up this sort of third category, this idea that there are people who might be opposed to the Iranian regime, but were skeptical as to whether or not the United States would really be there for them in the way that they had promised. And I think it's important to note that in the past 5 years, for the Iranian people who are opposed to this regime, you've seen, moments of hope, oscillating between moments of hope and then deep, deep disappointment. We all remember in 2022, the Mahsa Amini protests. A lot of people were saying at that time that that represented the most sort of serious threat to the Iranian regime that we've seen in many years. And then the crackdown afterwards by security forces was so severe that, of course, hopes were extinguished very quickly. We also saw the economic protests several months ago, the US intervention with the killing of the Ayatollah, the latest ceasefire, which only lasted a few days. You're sort of seeing this oscillation for the Iranian people who are opposed to the regime, lots of hope and then a lot of despair. So if all the sort of events that I've listed just now, the various protests, whether it's Mahsa Amini, economic protests, the US intervention, the US killing the Ayatollah, none of that has worked to bring about change, then what will?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? It's very difficult, but I think what serious activists and change makers inside the country keep saying is that change has to happen by Iranians inside Iran and the way they want it. Now, there may be disagreements or differences of opinion, but bombing schools full of children, universities and hospitals, homes, as we can just see on the screen. This is a home. This is not a government building. That's just not going to bring change. It's not going to bring better governance or transparency or democracy. It's not going to remove repression in the country. In fact, you can argue that the war and this sort of security environment has made political dissent even more difficult. It's closed the space for any form of opposition or dissent. Do we see any protests on the street? No. Part of the reason is because of this external foreign threat that has made things much worse. And, most Iranians look to their neighbors, to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to these places where the US has used hard power, immense hard power, and even to the point of regime change to supposedly bring a better future, better governance, democracy, nation building, even in the case of Afghanistan, women's rights. And none of that happened. You can argue matters have become even worse. And I think that's also reflected in the opinion of Americans. The American public, majority polls show, are opposed to these kind of endless, pointless wars in the Middle East because they don't bring the promises either from a US national security perspective, destroying the nuclear program, changing the regime, or from an Iranian perspective, helping the Iranian people, making things better for them. None of that happens. It's just US blood and treasure that's wasted, lots of Iranian lives, as you pointed, civilian infrastructure that's going to take years to rebuild and reconstruct.
I want you to sort of lay out for us what life is like in Iran for ordinary people right now, given the war. I think all of us will agree that the sort of fallout from this war between the United States and Iran is certainly lopsided. Here in the United States, it's felt through, obviously, yes, the death of 18 American servicemen and women, which is obviously very tragic for this country. But also it's largely felt through the effects of higher gas prices, which is a major political issue. And of course, for people who are living below the poverty line, who are living below a certain income threshold, the price of gas affects your daily lives in multiple ways. But the effects in Iran, I mean, you're talking about death, destruction, injury, people having to bury family members. Obviously, there was that horrible attack on that elementary school in the early days of the war. I mean, obviously, there is a massive difference between how both countries are experiencing the effects of this war inside their countries. Just talk to us about how ordinary civilians in Iran are experiencing this.
Absolutely. So as you laid out, the war is waged over there. So it's not felt as closely here in the US, although yes, the death of, every death is tragic. The death of service members, and then also it's reflected in gas prices. In Iran, it's reflected in every aspect of daily life. First of all, security, from the viewpoint of a civilian, no matter where you live in the country, because areas across the country have been hit. You don't know if you're the next target, if your home is the next target or the next collateral next to a target, if your child's school is going to be the next target, the hospital, the university, the road that you're about to go on. So it's seen from the viewpoint of civilians, very, very arbitrary. And, 4,000 people have been killed. And so that's evidence and lots of destruction. And we're just seeing more images coming up because there was also an internet blackout in the country. So we haven't seen enough images in real time of the destruction in Iran. Now we're getting to see them. And then also inflation, of course, it's reflected in the Iranian economy across the board. It's not just gas prices like here in the US, it's the price of everything, everyday goods. Although the country is running, it's interesting how the government has been able to maintain some form of, public service has been ongoing, and there hasn't been, let's say, shortages of any basic goods reported, but still inflation and that increase in price is something that civilians talk about a lot. And then, of course, this idea of your safety and security, which is first and foremost when you hear the bombs, when you hear the jets flying, and when you don't know which city, which neighborhood is going to be next. It's very, very horrific. And of course, people who have lost loved ones are still grieving for them.
When all is said and done and this war is over, and of course we all hope it will be soon, what will be the consequence for the Iranian people? I think that there are some who fear that the Iranian regime would have learnt the wrong lesson and perhaps crack down on the Iranian people even more. I mean, obviously in this kind of environment, you're not going to see protests, and perhaps with the Iranian people, there is, political scientists refer to revolutionary fatigue. When you've tried and tried again so many times to perhaps, through protests or through political activism, to try to sort of steer things democratically in a different direction, and your efforts don't amount to much. Just explain to us whether there is that fear that the security forces in Iran will crack down even more on the Iranian people after this war is said and done than they did prior to this war.
Right. I mean, certainly right now, like I said, there's a securitized environment, very little room for dissent, for any form of overt political dissent. After the war is done, we don't know when that is because it keeps, stopping. But after it's done, I'm not sure, because this is also sort of a new chapter for the Islamic Republic. I hope they will learn some lessons from the war. But also the society, I don't think the grievances are going to go away. The political, economic, social grievances, none of those will disappear. Yes, now there's no room for public presentation of any form of dissent. But I think once this external foreign threat is removed, the idea of getting bombed any minute, then this will be more internal between the state and the society. And that gap has been really wide, and they will have to address it or close the gap. Economic grievances are very, very serious. People's livelihood has been the reason for many protests over the years. And that we also see that reflected in how Iran is trying to negotiate. So one of the main demands in their negotiations from the US is economic relief. They understand that there has to be economic relief. They're looking for their frozen assets. They're looking for sanctions relief from the US because that problem is very, very severe. So we'll have to wait and see in long term if they can address any of these grievances or not, if this new chapter is going to have more openings. So after, for example, just one example, the Masa Amini protest, Women, Life, Freedom, this society, yes, there was repression, but the society, women, young people were able to push the state back one step and make some achievements because of the very high price that they paid in those protests. So now you, for example, look at public life in Iran, the dress code, mandatory hijab, the core of that, of those protests, they have made some gains and they have been able to push the state back. But, it's very slow process. It's been coming at a very high cost. And what I want to reiterate is that this foreign, external, hard power military attack is not going to make things better. In fact, it may even make it worse in the long term.